Hello. Today we are joined by Kelly Ablard, who is the founder and director of the Airmid Institute, which is dedicated to the global education, research, and sustainable management of aromatic medicinal plants. Her passion for essential oils, sustainability, and working with communities comes through as a global speaker, author, researcher, community scientist, and as an educator. We are so excited to have her on our little show today. Thank you, Kelly, for being here.
Thank you, Heather.
We're going to kick off by asking you, why did you start the Airmid Institute?
My background in aromatherapy, I should probably start off by saying I have a background in conservation. And while I was working on my degree in conservation, I kind of transferred into the world of chemical ecology. And it was during that time that I started studying aromatherapy because as it happens, chemical ecology really is thinking about the chemical interactions between all the species on the planet, which is really invisible to the naked human eye, but oftentimes we can detect it with our sense of smell. And we find that a lot of the same constituents in essential oil-bearing plants are used to mediate interactions throughout the animal kingdom. And because of the conservation background and this connection between or marriage, I like to say, between the world of aromatherapy and chemical ecology, I ended up working on some threatened species that really rely on chemical communication for their survival. And so that's kind of what got me started thinking about, we have the most toxic primate in the world, which I worked on. And then, of course, we've got all these beautiful plants that I work with. And I realized as an aromatherapist that this is one area that I felt wasn't really being highlighted. So I thought I better start doing some research and find out what kind of plants are, facing extinction and think about the supply and demand and how we're using these. And that was about 6 years ago. I got heavily involved in it and come to find out that at that time there was about 4% that are commonly traded on the world market that, were facing extinction. So from there, I've never stopped the work. And that is what brought me to the Airmid Institute.
So you covered a little bit of my question, but mine was around the study of chemical ecology and how it actually influenced your decision to start the Airmid Institute. And I'm also curious a little bit, more in terms of details, what exactly is it? What is it that you do?
Well, right now, so I've been out of the lab for a few years, but what I now do is I spend a lot of my time just down in Peru, working on an endangered tree, which happens to be one of the most fragrant trees in all of the world, which is rosewood. And I do actually work with some labs that we test the oil for adulteration and that type of thing. I have a little bit of the work now in the field, and I work with labs that are actual chemical ecologists that are analyzing some of the material. And then, of course, I'm working very closely with the indigenous populations, making sure that we're working together to kind of help promote and protect their medicine.
So your website states that the Aramid Institute promotes and protects the use of traditional medicine by Indigenous people, which is a wonderful initiative. Could you please elaborate on that?
Sure. So what we do is, I guess it really started off when I was working in Peru, learning how different indigenous communities like the Quechua, the Shipbo, and the Kokama are using aromatic plant medicine in their day-to-day living. But what I ended up finding out is, in fact, how a lot of that medicine is threatened and it's over-harvested. And because of climate change, they're having difficulty actually accessing that medicine. And as it happens, a lot of the aromatic plants that they're using are in high demand throughout other parts of the world. So this is something we're seeing. A lot of the essential oil-bearing plants, although some do exist in North America, like white sage, for example, and even Hawaiian sandalwood, the majority are occurring throughout the world where many communities don't have the means necessarily to protect the trees from, being over-harvested, and even replanting. It can be quite difficult for them to do. And so we want to work with those communities because you see, that type of medicine is not just important to them medicinally, but it has a very important cultural, component to it as well, and a spiritual component. It's used in ceremony. I can go on and on about how rosewood is so hugely important to the Shipbo. And of course, that's one of the most commercially valuable essential oils on the world market today. So when you take that away from them, you're taking a piece of their culture away from them. You're taking medicine away from them, money, and all kinds of things. And so it's really important that we step back when we're thinking about using essential oils and thinking about the people who are actually living with these plants and relying on these plants in ways that we don't even, or maybe oftentimes we don't even think about or can imagine that connection that they have.
Yeah, that leads into my question. I mean, what does sustainable agriculture then look like to you, and how are, say, Western approaches different than the indigenous ones, especially of the Shipbo people?
Right. So I find that, the Western approach is actually quite similar. In many ways, it's a little more complex. I find that when I've worked with the Shipbo and I see how they do things, it's all just, this information has been carried through generation after generation. There is no one's going to school, no one's getting certified in sustainable agriculture. They don't have like special, certification that they need to get to have, this type of water coming in or this type of soil tested. They just know. They have a really amazing connection to the land and to the plants. And it's because they have this relationship that I think the Western kind of end of things is a bit different. I'm not to say that, Western world doesn't have that type of relationship with the land and the plants, but it's innate and it has been for generations with these cultures that I work with. So in many ways, they're mirroring the same kind of function and the sustainable agriculture and the practice, so to speak. But in terms of the connection and the way it came about, it's very, very different, I think.
And so with Rosewood, what would sustainable agriculture look like?
So with Rosewood, really the most important thing, and this is with all the communities we work with, is to really ensure that any sort of plant material you're taking, which I don't even have to tell them to do this. I mean, this is kind of, just common sense to them, the sustainable harvesting kind of practice, but always replant what you take, replant, and educate, pass that information down to the children. I've worked with children who are 4 years old that know so much about sustainable agriculture, it would just blow you away. It would blow you away. They just teach you at a very young age to do this because this is what you do. And so, for that reason, it's just something that, it's very much a part of who they are.
That makes sense.
What kind of social and environmental justice issues surround rosewood cultivation?
Well, funnily, being in these communities is actually really respected. People love the fact when people come in and want to help get these projects off the ground. Like social justice, when I think about that, I actually have to distill that down to the level of the community I'm actually working with in itself. And it's there that I have to put kind of provisions and checks and balances into place to ensure that, kind of the wealth that the community gets is being distributed amongst everybody. Not just one person in the community gets this. There's equal opportunities for the men, the women, and even the children. We offer different scholarships to some of the people if they want to learn aromatherapy or whatever it may be. So in that respect, we kind of work with the social justice end of things within the community itself in making sure there's checks and balances. I find that with environmental justice, it naturally, there's no conflict, there's no resistance. It's something that's really celebrated when you're doing this kind of work, believe it or not, within those communities, yeah.
So something that we think we can do is buy CITES certified materials, but I would like you to kind of discuss the ethics of buying CITES certified and whether the purchasing of even a certified source for endangered plants and materials, could you expound on the ethics of that as well, please?
Yeah, no, thank you. So that's an important question. I get that asked a lot because there is this school of thought where, if you have a plant that's endangered, it doesn't matter what certification it comes with, don't buy it, don't engage, don't anything. But, and I maybe would have agreed with that idea about 5 years ago until I started working with some of the communities that are working very, very hard to obtain the CITES certification. And I should probably make it really clear that in order to get a CITES permit, it is extremely difficult. And you must show that you are in fact practicing sustainable management and that you are in fact replanting the trees for future generations before they'll even consider giving you a CITES permit. So when you are in effect buying something and you actually have proof that it has the CITES certification, what you're doing is you're actually in many ways protecting that plant. You're giving it you're giving it life. You're giving it, you know that it's being replanted, you know that the communities are working hard and getting reimbursed for that. This is their, and they deserve that. They deserve that. So I celebrate people that are working with these communities and that are the communities themselves, because that is one way in our world today, unfortunately, that they have to protect their medicine. So I encourage that. The thing is that sometimes CITES permits, you know, you get knockoffs and that type of thing. It's very difficult to kind of discern, you know, the real thing from the fake. So sometimes we have people come to Aramid and say, look at this, and I've seen forgeries, you know, and of course we'll have to work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife to ensure that in fact the supplier does have a CITES certificate, which by the way, each country has their own. So to say that, hey, I'm from Peru and I have a CITES certificate doesn't mean they have one for Brazilian rosewood. In Brazil, you need it as well. So each country has to have that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Really
then you do believe that rosewood can be cultivated sustainably?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, you know, because we now know that you can harvest the rosewood branches, which is really nice. I mean, if you're looking for, like in the perfume industry, which you guys I know you're all perfumers and these amazing, which I love to know more about actually, but you have rosewood oil, which is, you know, if you're looking at some place like Chanel, you know, they're kind of the ones that started the whole, you know, fixation with linalool and started harvesting rosewood in like the 1930s. You know, commercially, kind of the commercial grade of what's accepted in the perfume industry at the highest level is rosewood oil at 85% linalool. But that is not necessary, you know, in terms of therapeutic benefits. You don't need that much linalool, or even the fragrance profile doesn't require that. So you can actually, you know, sustainably harvest branches or even the leaves. You could do distillations on the leaves, and it may not have as much linalool, but the fragrance profile might be similar. And it still can have some beautiful therapeutic benefits. And of course, it's amazing for perfumers.
Mm-hmm. And as perfumers, we should be able to figure that out. Like you don't always need a perfect material. It's part of our craft to figure out what those, you know, have solutions for those types of problems or that difference.
It is. And it's hard though. I mean, there's so many things that you have to think about when you're trying to source these materials, and it can be really overwhelming sometimes. You know, I mean, even essential oils, we're all doing this. You ask questions, you go to websites, you read information, but I often find these days that unfortunately, that doesn't tell the whole story. You know, I was trying to find a little more out about Young Living at the time. They were selling rosewood oil, and I went to their farm in Peru and they wouldn't let me near it. They wouldn't let me near it. But boy, it sure looked good on their website. You know, I was convinced that this was the real deal, CITES all the way. And of course, they got, you know, nicked pretty badly a couple of years ago for illegal trafficking of rosewood oil. And of course, spikenard, which I believe is used also in perfumery, as is critically endangered, and they illegally was trafficking that as well. So it's hard to do the homework and it's hard to ask the questions. And that's the other thing, you know, Aramid is there to support people that are trying to do the right thing. They maybe don't have all the tools in their toolkit to make those decisions, but their heart is in the right place, you know? So, but it is the responsibility of each and every person to, you know, make that, you know, that conscious decision to do that. And part of this is, you know, wanting to, you know, in terms of aromatherapy, I'm now looking to change it from a different angle. You know, you have these professional aromatherapy associations that are kind of governing the recognized curriculum throughout the North America, you know, including Canada and the US. And that information needs to be taught. That information needs to be taught. So all the aromatherapists that are going out there just know that when they go out there, how to do this.
So I'm going to lead in a little bit. It's a project, I guess, that you did, which we were curious about. It says in a recent announcement, you reported that enfleurage recently stopped carrying rosewood due to your collaborative efforts. So could you provide some details on that process?
Sure. So it was a really fun process, and it was great. It was actually all by mistake. I went in there one day. Entourage is this amazing place in New York, very well known for the beautiful aromatics they bring in. And I saw rosewood, and I thought, oh, I'm curious if they have a CITES permit. It was this amazing Brazilian rosewood. So the guys that work there are super open, and they're super like conscious, conservation consciousness is what they are all about. And they were so proud. They said, this is sustainably managed. We have a certificate that says that. And I said, that is awesome, So they were willing, they showed me that, so transparent. And I said, well, what about the CITES certificate? What's the CITES certificate? So then things started, and that's the problem is people may not even know it exists. So in their mind, they're doing the right thing. But in fact, there's this other little bit that's missing. So when having that conversation with them, they found out that, oh my goodness, there also has to be a CITES permit to actually export that legally. When they went back to the supplier in Brazil, unfortunately, they couldn't provide that information. So they immediately took it off of their shelves. Now, mind you, this was a couple years ago, but it was that type of commitment that I really celebrated, and that kind of educational process that, sometimes as retailers, you don't want to knock retailers either. They just don't know any better, but their heart's in the right place. So that's why education is so important. If we have that information, we can just say, hey, did you check the CITES permit? What's that? Oh, well, here, this is what it is. Oh man, oh my God, and so, and what that does is it builds credibility for them too, because hey, man, I'm CITES certified now. Look at this. It's like, whoa, you can really feel proud and know that you're protecting communities and the plants. That's a whole nother level.
And what advice do you have for perfumers about how to source materials sustainably? What should they look for? What questions should they be asking?
Yeah. So first of all, the one thing that always price is the big thing for me. So if I find rosewood, like a 5 ml bottle of rosewood for, $10, just forget it. I think, and you see that a lot. It's like, oh man, I found rosewood for like $15 today. Okay. But that's that price. The price point is like one of the big, the other thing now, unfortunately, a lot of the plants that we're sourcing essential oils from that are threatened, unfortunately, those are going to be adulterated. Like 80% of them are at this point. So it also requires a whole nother level of getting maybe chemical analysis to show, first of all, authenticity of the material that you're getting. Now, mind you, you're not always working with essential oils. I know you have other, materials that you use, but there are many different instruments that you can test these things with. So you're testing for authenticity. You're testing for adulteration. Oftentimes rosewood oil will be adulterated with one of two things. Well, three actually. Another species of rosewood, which has a lot less linalool, so not good for the perfumers that are looking for the top grade. Hoe wood, leaf oil. Yeah, it smells just like rosewood oil, by the way. That's a huge adulterant of rosewood. And then, of course, synthetic linalool. But you need chemical instrumentation to kind of, discern what is what. So, depending on if you have an idea that, hey, this is coming from a threatened source, not getting the information I really needed. I went to this, retailer or this source. They don't have a good relationship with their supplier. You really also want to make sure the people you're sourcing from knows what's going on the other end, that they can trace it. There's, I can say, hey, this was distilled on this day and it was this batch number and it was packaged on this date and I've had it on my shelf for this long. That is information you should be able to, get. So those are the things I would look for. And I think just having the knowledge, which I really love seeing your list of threatened essential oil or aromatic plants, because that information is invaluable. Once you know what plants are being, near threatened or threatened, then you can start asking the questions, appropriate questions when need be. And that can be sustainable management. Can I see an eco certificate? Oh, that's a CITES protected plant. I need to see CITES, certificate. Oh, this particular oil, I don't know. I need to just double check and make sure it's not adulterated. So I'm going to take a sample. I'm going to send it off for $100 and just make sure. oftentimes what we find now is a lot of the suppliers do that for you. And that's what gives them that kind of value added component to what they're doing. You pay a little more for that awesome material because they went and they took the extra steps to ensure you as the consumer that, hey, I did everything I was supposed to do and I'm going to prove it to you. So, you know, those are the people I also say celebrate, and yeah, you pay a little more, but it's worth it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, I mean, that's all the questions that we had for you.
Oh.
There's such a wealth of information. Unless does anyone have any follow-up questions?
I have one about, we kind of asked what perfumers could do, but also as the Coalition of Sustainable Perfumery, what do you think that we could provide to other indie perfumers as well as consumers that would be useful information that they could then use to be more sustainable themselves?
Yeah, I think that you guys are already on the right track. The list that you provide, I think, is very, very important. That's, you know, and I know that there's also some guidelines you're working on. I think, Heather, you're working on for kind of certain things you look for in terms of sustainable farming and the questions that you ask. I think just providing people with the knowledge base. And the thing about it is it can be overwhelming. So, you know, a lot of perfumers can look at this and say, okay, I'm going to ask this question about, you know, soil management or chemical analysis, but still they're feeling, you know, overwhelmed. I think just offering that support or having somebody that can support them through that journey, because it can really be overwhelming. And even though you want to give everybody the tools that they need, sometimes putting those tools into action is a different thing than just having them, you know. And even if they ask the right questions, they may not even know if they're getting the right answers. So it really takes, I think, kind of a collective knowledge base to maybe work together to ensure, if, you know, be a resource for people that, you know, they can come to you and you can work collectively to make sure that those suppliers are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. It takes a village as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Just kind of curious, what with everything going on, do you have any plans to go back to Peru anytime soon?
Well, the plans are for next year. I was supposed to be there this year. And unfortunately, COVID has affected two of the communities that I work with very closely. So the Rosewood project is on pause, but we are working on the Rosewood Oil study for adulterants of rosewood oil. So yes, next year it's going to be really fun, because I'm just thinking very positively here. COVID's out of the picture. We're back up and running. Everything's good. Rosewood, the Toucan project, we're just going to continue on that realm. And then also a beautiful, beautiful essence used by perfumers is called Piri Piri. And it's incredible. The Shipbo, it's kind of like, you know how we resonate with rosemary? It's just kind of something we grow in our yard. You know, this is what Piri Piri is to the Shipbo. And so we're looking at distilling and kind of making this available. It's something that you can easily grow. It's not endangered. And, you know, it's one of these beautiful plants, and the smell is just intoxicating.
Describe the smell. We all want to know.
Oh my gosh. I you know, yeah. Well, you just have to come to Peru and see for yourself.
Field trip.
Yeah. But there are some perfumers that are definitely seeking it out, and this is a really great thing because it's really low input for maximum output.
Awesome.
You know. It's easy to grow. It grows in their backyard. You're not taking a boat for 9 hours up the tributary of the Amazon to get to the Rosewood. You're just walking outside. You're picking up the Piri Piri. You're breaking it off. You distill it. Awesome, right?
That's awesome.
So yeah. So that's something on the books for next year. You know, all hoping and praying that things resume soon to, you know, some normalcy and they're healthy and get back on track. Yeah.
Well, it's exciting.
Thanks. Yeah.
I have a follow-up. It's maybe like a slightly heavy one, so apologies, but I think it's really important. I think it's really important and wonderful that you are speaking to how very frequently Western makers and Western culture bypasses the spiritual relevance of these sacred plants to Indigenous
Oh,
populations,
yeah.
peoples, and cultures and traditions. To all of us at the COSP, but specifically two of us, Molly and I, have spiritually themed brands. And I would like to ask what advice you have to other brands who have, similar approaches to the design of fragrance or to the sacredness of botanical materials or fragrant materials in general, on what they need to be doing, what kind of homework they need to be doing to ensure that their fragrance materials are not only sustainable in terms of environmental, but also human factors, and what kind of homework they need to be doing to make sure that they're not doing this kind of spiritual bypassing, this appropriative and kind of reconstructive approach to using these materials just for brand image and commercial purposes and marketing purposes. That's what businesses frequently are. So I would love your insight into that.
That is a great question. I love that. And that is something that is overlooked oftentimes when sourcing various plants, especially when you're working with, I find a lot of, well, the Peruvians and a lot of the Brazilians, that connection to spirit is first and foremost. Absolutely. And as you well know, and I'm sure Molly too, who has this kind of connection with the plants and understands their importance on this level, it is the plant that speaks to them. It is the plant that is teaching them, and so whenever I work with the Peruvians like this, the first thing, and I think it's important that maybe I should think about Aramid and how we also teach and educate people. It's that level of respect that you have for the plant. It is that acknowledging that the plant is there, recognizing it as a soul, as a spirit, asking before you take, replenishing, finding a balance, and having a real sacred connection to that. It's hard to teach someone how to do that. Oftentimes, it's one of these things where, it's foreign. It sounds crazy, but the funny thing is now in the Western world, we're starting to see, some of the kind of prestigious universities having ethics put in place for plant research. Why? Because they have 5 senses. They're intelligent beings. So now we're starting to see the Western world's like, oh, these are intelligent creatures. So maybe they'll start thinking about how they treat them a little bit differently. Not to say that everybody's not doing that already, but you know what I mean. But it's hard to get somebody to do that. When I work with people, when I teach and I bring plants in, there is always that, I always pause, I have people close their eyes, and I say, I want you to just think of the one plant that comes to you, and I want you to connect with it, and I want you just to say thank you. I want you to honor it and respect it. And that's how I always either end my talks or start. And I really make it a point to teach that, because even though I have a huge background in science, it was really my travels through Peru and working with plant medicine on this level that I found out that science takes the back seat. Really, it takes the back seat. So I don't know. That's just me rambling on and on. I don't know if I really answered your question, but
Me, so
that was beautiful. Yeah, thank you.
That was beautiful.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's just as important as anything else, and I really am so glad you brought that to mind, because I hate to say it, but I've gotten knocked around a bit being a scientist and having this spiritual connection, or close your eyes and feel the plant and do this. It's like, what is she talking about? But I tell you what's interesting about that is afterwards I'll have people just like, oh my God, that was amazing. Or I felt that, or, when I've worked with people in an environment, as a community scientist, that's what I do is I would bring in all the aromatics, and I bring in, so I connect them to the plant in a different way. And so they see it as a being. They see it with more respect. And when you think about something like the beautiful fragrance of rose, what are you smelling? You're smelling partly geraniol. What does geraniol do? I mean, that's so important for the honeybees and helping them find and mark their food and helping them get back to their hive and get to their little entrance okay. We see bees and we like bees and we like roses, but they're all connected. And that's the same with spirit. We're all one. So it's that whole different level. it's that whole level of making people see nature in a different way. Even though a lot of these plants we can grow in our backyard, that's the other thing I should say is, you know, you have all these beautiful herbs that we're growing and we're distilling, and they're abundant, right? You know, we're not worried about them just disappearing off the face of the planet in 10 years, but actually that may not be the case. I always want to encourage people to source sustainably. Ethical sourcing is huge. I don't care what it is you're after. You know, we've got to be thinking about how the plants that ended up in those positions in the first place, what happened there, you know, the breakdown, how that occurred. We're finding that now with a special mint in southern Peru. You know, mint, it grows everywhere, but this is not the case for this particular mint, which is so used throughout the culture. It's unbelievable. And if they don't do something about the harvesting methods, because the government's been involved, it's a long story, that could be gone in 50 years. So
Is that Muna by chance?
yeah, yes,
It's
it is.
Muna?
Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
Muna. Yeah, yeah. So,
Wow.
yeah, yes.
I didn't realize
So,
that.
So that is something that, you know, we're working to get the, well, there was a survey done last year, and because I couldn't go back this year, that project's been put on hold, but we're working on a report to submit to the IUCN to get a status. We need it assessed. We need it assessed. Yeah. So it grows in the high mountains in the Andes. You know, 14,000 feet up is when you're finding Munya. And, you know, the government has really encouraged a lot of people to go out and distill it. And people need money. They need to feed their families in these communities. So unfortunately, some people are just kind of ripping it out of the ground, and it has a very special kind of growing season and relationship with, you know, Pachamama, so to speak. And so for that reason, we have to step back and intervene. I work with the president of a society of Incan medicine who is working to help educate the people in their sustainable harvesting practices of Munya, because if that doesn't change, just a regular herb like mint can in fact face extinction. So we do need to be mindful.
How closely do you work with the IUCN? And if we do include this in the video, I'll just go ahead and explain the acronym as the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and they have a red list of
Yes.
assessed botanicals.
That's exactly right. Perfect. So I don't work directly with them, but I have received training from them so that I am a red list assessor, which, by the way, anybody can do. If you go through the training, it is free. And that's the great thing about it, is they encourage people to, again, get out there and connect with the plants and see what's in their backyard and make that conscious decision to contribute to a kind of collective data source. But the IUCN is very stringent, of course, in terms of getting a plant assessed. It takes a lot of different things a lot of moving parts, so to speak. So I've done all the literature review. You have to, you know, work with the people. You've got to get your GIS points. You've got to go through all of these various things. But yes, once that plant has been assessed and it's out there, I mean, that's probably the most credible source to go to, other than like maybe the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, to look for the threatened status of a species. Mind you, essential oil-bearing plants, you're not going to see that many through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. What the U.S. Fish and Wildlife does actually enforce is the Lacey Act, okay? And it's the Lacey Act, which is the extension of CITES, okay? So that's where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife is very much part of what we do in terms of bringing oils in that are CITES protected that don't have certificates. And that's who nailed Young Living, was the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly Ablard, for joining us today. This was a wonderful conversation. We covered a lot of really important things, and we look forward to chatting with you again sooner and working closely with you as we progress the vision and the mission of the COSP.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mauricio. Thank you, everyone, COSP,
you.
for having me today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.